미래는 항상 불확실하고 사람들은 언제나 미래를 궁금해합니다. 세계 3대 미래학자 리차드왓슨이 사람들의 주목을 받는 이유는 분명합니다. 그는 현실을 냉철히 파악하고 흘러가는 트렌드를 기가 막히게 읽어내죠. 그리고 사람들이 궁금해하는 미래의 그림을 그립니다. 나아가 보다 나은 미래를 맞이하기 위해 개인과 기업이 지금 당장 해야 할 일을 일러줍니다. 글로벌 금융위기 이후 세계를 둘러싼 불확실성이 더 커졌습니다. 명쾌한 해법을 갈망하는 이들은 더 많아졌고요. 이제부터 리차드왓슨이 전망하는 앞으로의 세상을 그리고 그가 제안하는 삶의 방법들을 한번 들어보시죠.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for joining us today. First of all, I'd like to ask you in a wide-ranged point of view. The future is very uncertain and unpredictable, where we can find risk and opportunities at the same time. Then, would you say the future is a utopia or a dystopia?
It's both. It's neither, and it's both in a sense. I think you can find utopias or dystopias in it,
right.
if you look. I think in the short term we have some issues. There is quite a bottleneck, particularly around resources and inequality and so on. But I think if you start looking longer term, if you start going out more than 30, 40 years, I think it looks really, really exciting. But I think it depends. It has the potential to be both for different people. And I think the utopia and the dystopia can exist alongside each other as well.
Okay, second, emerging markets. After the global financial crisis, the importance of emerging markets got bigger than ever before. Do you think this trend will continue?
It looks likely. I mean, it is the most likely scenario that it will continue, and China will be the world's biggest economy in 10, 12, 15 years. And the growth is going to come out of Asia, and Europe is going to decline quite dramatically, or at least stagnate. With Britain and Germany actually do relatively well. Britain for demographic reasons more than anything else, and the US does okay as well for demographic reasons and some other reasons. But it looks the most likely. But you have to be careful. I mean, there is the strong possibility, there is a possibility that something unexpected is going to happen. And I mean, one of the, I guess, advantages of being slightly older is you've seen this sort of thing before. So we had hysteria around the Asian tiger economies, and they crashed out. We had, I've got a book at home called Japan Inc. I've now got one called China Inc. And Japan was going to take over the world sort of 25, 30 years ago. For a while it was going to be Germany, everyone was trying to copy. So, things happen, and there are some significant risks, particularly attached to China. And I think there is a certain level of hysteria around the BRICS at the moment, and all of the focus is on China, and there are massive opportunities with India. And India is in a way more resilient than China. Its sort of craziness and its complexity and chaos means, in a sense, it's quite resilient. And we should pay more attention to India. We should certainly pay more attention to Brazil. I think Russia is problematic in some ways. And then there's the next 11 countries, of which Korea is one, that are widely ignored. And I'm not saying we abandon China. It's just I think we should make our attention a bit more even, and our investments a little bit more even. And there are some really serious problems with China. I mean, China could crash out.
Oh, really?
Oh, I think so. I wouldn't like to put a percentage on it, but it is. It's distinctly possible, and there's lots of reasons. I mean, everyone talks about real estate bubbles, and their banking system is similar to Japan in the 90s. They've got social inequality problems. They've got environmental problems, particularly water. None of which I think is a massive problem, but the one to really watch will be demographic again, which is they have an imbalance of young men in the population, and without the calming influence of women. And that's fine if you've got reasonable growth, but if these men are on the streets with no jobs and no prospects, that could be a very dangerous situation indeed. Now, and I think the trigger for that wouldn't be internal, it would come from outside China. I mean, if Europe collapsed or America collapsed or something, that would really hit China because at the moment they're so export orientated. So there are all sorts of things that could happen if you take a long enough view. So don't ever say something's certain. It is likely that things will do as we expect, but there are other possibilities.
In our former email interview, you were focusing on China as agreeing the power shift to emerging countries, as you also mentioned before. China already became one of the top 2 countries in global economy, named G2, you know. What's the role of China in global economy in the long term?
I think that's up to China. You would hope that China engages with the international community. I think there's a real opportunity for China to reshape a lot of the international institutions. At the moment, they were largely set up by Western interests and have a Western perspective on a lot of the problems, and it'd be interesting to have more breadth there. And I don't have an answer to that one, but I'm hoping that China will engage. I mean, historically, it has periods where it disengages, so that is always a possibility as well. But I think now, and particularly if and when China, and it probably will become the biggest economy, there are some responsibilities, I think, that go along with that, certainly in its immediate region, but broader than that as well. And I think stability would be one of the absolutely key roles, stability and security.
Third, global connectivity. There is no limitation of time and space for us living in the globalized one world, especially in terms of competition, as you mentioned. What strategy we have to follow as a company in this environment of unlimited competition?
I think the secret to some extent in a very globalized competitive world is specialization and to some extent hyper-specialization. To really focus in on one very small thing and be the best at it. I think that is a massive opportunity in a sort of hyper-connected world. And I think beyond that, the opportunity would be around people. I think, all companies fundamentally are about people, and we now have, to some extent, the whole world to get the best people from. And on the one hand, there's global competition to get the best people, but if you can get really, really good people and hold on to them, you would become an incredible company. You are not limited by the people that are in your immediate geographic region anymore. You can hire from anywhere in the world. And also, I think the more diversity you get in terms of people, the better your ideas, because then you get cross-fertilization of experience.
What's the risk for companies?
The risk is lots more competition, particularly with Western companies, lots more very low-cost competition that don't necessarily have any legacy issues. They've set up from scratch. They're extremely well-funded. Some of them are not constrained by the ethical issues that constrain, for example, European ethical. So the environmental policies, social policies, and so on and so forth. They don't have those constraints coming out of some other regions.
Next is sustainability. More and more people pay attention to the balance between the environment and the growth these days. What kind of consequences do you expect of this growing interest for companies and consumers' behavior and the decisions they make?
I think it fundamentally depends on what the economy does. When the economy got into trouble, late 2007, 2008, the whole green agenda thing got pushed to one side because it was too far away and too uncertain. People were focused on more immediate threats, which was their job and the economy. So assuming we sort out the national and global economy, I think the whole sustainability, climate change thing will come back very, very strongly, and already is to some extent. And I think we should expect more regulation, not less. I think we should expect increasingly active consumers demanding full transparency around how things are made. I quite like this term life story labeling, and it's people are a little bit cynical around big government and big institutions, and they want to know where is it from, how is it made, what circumstances, which factory, where can I have a web link to the factory so I can look at it. And it's a bit like when you buy a bottle of wine, it can tell you which year it was made, by whom, with a name, which vineyard exactly, what method, and all of this kind of information. I think there is a real thirst out there for that kind of information on everything from a camera through to a car through to a washing machine. People want to know who's behind it, can I trust them, carbon footprints, but also, water. I mean, water is a real issue going forward in terms of scarcity. And at the moment, it's in virtually everything, but it's hidden. A white T-shirt takes a phenomenal amount of water to produce that cotton. A hamburger takes a phenomenal amount of water. And we may see sort of labeling around there. I think the whole thing around corporate social responsibility will intensify. So there will be sort of greater demands for sort of proper accounting. I also think there will be an interesting debate emerge, and to some extent it already has emerged, around, what do we mean by growth? How do we measure it? And are there better ways of measuring how well a country is doing versus... I mean, GDP is a very blunt instrument, and we're beginning to see people getting very interested in the livability of a city, in happiness metrics, and all that kind of thing. And also, if you look at the way the economies are changing, we've obviously moved from a manufacturing economy, or are moving from a manufacturing economy into a very much a knowledge-based and even post-knowledge economy, and a lot of the things that create value don't necessarily create any jobs. I mean, this is the thing we're seeing with America right now. You're getting a sort of, to some extent, a job-free recovery, and if you look at a lot of these social media companies, they create enormous social value, but they don't particularly employ anybody. Then half of them don't even make any money either. So they don't really figure in GDP figures, yet they're clearly contributing something. So how do we measure that? And I think there's going to be an awful lot of debate around how you capture value, how you measure value, what's important to people, and there's a shift away from just money towards meaning and experience in many ways as well. I think with some people, when you reach a certain level, it's no longer just about the money. It's about experiences rather than just products, and it's about meaning and purpose are hugely important to people, and that will sort of come through. We will develop metrics around this.
I'd like to talk about the keyword polarization that you suggest when you predict the future. We can find the symptoms of this polarization in many areas already. Does this trend will continuously last?
I think this comes back to your original question about dystopia or utopia. The future is many things. There is not a future. There will be lots of futures running in parallel, and we will experience the future in different ways depending on who we are, where we are, how much money we have, and so on and so forth. And you're beginning to see this already. I mean, if you have the money, you can afford the best healthcare and education in the world to some extent. If you don't have the money, you are stuck with the most basic form. If you have some money, you have a private banker that you can phone up and have a conversation with. If you have next to no money, you have to deal with a call center or some kind of automated voice that isn't very helpful at all. And I think one of the things that's happening is technology is magnifying or accelerating a lot of the trends that already exist. So the wins and the losses are becoming magnified. So you can, in a globalized, technologically driven, knowledge economy, you can make a tremendous amount of money if you're very, very talented, and it's a bit of a utopia. You can buy almost anything you want to some extent. If you are not really engaged with the knowledge economy, and you have the wrong education or the wrong skills, the losses are significant as well, because you are competing now on a global level. Not just with the sort of the local environment. And I think this polarization between, first of all, there is rising social inequality and income inequality within nations. We've got a situation where there is less inequality between individual nations, but once you look at an individual nation, the inequality is increasing. I think that's causing enormous problems. But the polarization is other places as well. It can be very, very stressful at one end of society and quite relaxing at another. You can, again, at certain levels, you can pay to be chauffeured around and take private jets and all the rest of it. And the other end, you're getting stuck in traffic jams. And you even see it literally with traffic. We're beginning to see the emergence of road pricing, where the road can be free if you want to spend the day sat in the traffic jam, but if you want to pay money, you can go in the fast lane. I mean, in America they're called Lexus lanes because that's generally what's in the fast lane. And you can see that principle being applied to all sorts of things, where the more money you want to pay for something, the better the quality of the product or the surface, which is really quite worrying from a sort of social stability point of view. I'm not sure how long people will put up with that potentially.
And the dark side, the company or individual who fail to catch up or to be a part of that advanced group will fall behind forever.
Yeah, but I think that's not particularly anything new. I mean, if you look at history and go back into the relatively recent past of the Industrial Revolution, if you were caught out with the wrong skills, if you had agricultural skills and everything was moving to sort of urban environments and manufacturing, you could be in a lot of trouble. If you were making horse carts and Carl Benz had just invented the automobile in 1896, you could be in a lot of trouble because you've got a company making things that nobody wants anymore. So I think that's always been true, and which is why I think there's benefit to actually trying to keep an eye on what is happening, the new things that are emerging, the opportunities and the risks and so on. But like always, there are winners and losers. And I suppose that the good news is, up to the present day, a lot of the key indicators are very positive. Extreme poverty has been reduced significantly. Literacy rates are improving. Infant mortality rates are improving. A lot of the basic indicators are doing really, really well. And we shouldn't forget about that. But yes, we also have some problems too.
Yeah, and interesting question. You've emphasized the importance of right brain for many times. What's the reason the right brain becomes more important than before?
I think, first of all, we have to be aware of the fact that this left brain, right brain thing is not quite true, because we need both sides of the brain, and one side helps the other out.
Right.
But it's a useful shorthand to talk about, the logical left and the more creative, intuitive right. The reason I say that is very simple, and it's to do with technology and where that is going. And it is a very serious issue for education, because the education model and structure hasn't changed in 200 years or something, whereas the world has. And machines are getting extremely good at acquiring information and applying it. Anything that we do that has a set of rules attached to it, machines can do incredibly well. And this isn't just making screws and nuts in a factory. This is, if it's a lawyer interpreting case law, machines can do that. The lawyers that will succeed in the future aren't the ones that can simply sort of swat up on the case law. It's the ones that are really good with a client or in front of a jury, that have those kind of skills. So I think what we have to do is think about what are the skills going forward that machines are, what are intelligent machines really bad at? And they're, in my view, bad at two fundamental things. One is original thinking and creativity, which links into innovation very fundamentally. And the other thing is sort of human empathy, dealing with people. And although they're getting better at both of those things, but they're still relatively awful at it compared to humans. And I suppose the other thing is, what can't you outsource to a low-cost country? It's very difficult in a sense. Yes, you can have distance learning, but school is also around, school should be physical up to a point, because it's about socialization, and the teacher has to have some very soft skills such as empathy and intuition, which machines aren't very good at, and you can't really outsource either. So certain things are quite safe, I think, as professions in the future, but we have to change our education system. I'm not suggesting we throw out the accumulation of facts and the importance of logic and basic subjects. It's just we need to also spend more time teaching people how to think, and particularly teaching people how to think creatively and originally and innovatively, and also how to get the best out of other people and to deal with other people. I think that's really, really important. We're missing a little bit of a trick at the moment. We are teaching to a very specific outcome, which is passing exams which have very set results, and we need to be teaching people how to invent things, how to sort of spot problems and solutions, how to deal with other people in a good way, and so on and so forth.
People tend to call you a future strategy consultant, not a futurist. I find the reason is that you don't just predict the future, but also guide the directions to go. And then the last question, what is the number one thing we have to do right now?
To answer the first one first, yes, I'm called lots of things. I'm somewhat uncomfortable with the word futurist because it has a lot of negative history baggage. I mean, if you look at the history of predictions, it's not very good. And there's a lot of slightly crazy people calling themselves futurists, so that's a problem. And it's also a problem, I think, because it's actually the wrong word. It should be futurologist, because, I mean, futurist comes from the futurist movement about 100 years ago, which were people that were concerned about the future, but they had one particular view of it, which was very technological, very accelerated, and they didn't have any time at all for other possibilities. And I think that's wrong. I think you have to constantly think about multiple possibilities and all sorts of different scenarios. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the term. In terms of offering directions, I think that's important. I mean, it is fun to speculate and to paint pictures and write stories and so on, but and particularly fun to make predictions. And the more provocative they are, the more fun they are. But I think to some extent people do want a little bit of guidance as to, okay, well, what is actually happening out there right now? What does it mean? Where is it going? And, you know, what should I be thinking about? What should I be doing? What are some of the risks out there that I need to worry about? And what are some of the opportunities out there that I should be embracing? And I think that's quite important. And I mean, in the first book I wrote, Future Files, I had some particular views about where it was going and some particular views about some of the things we shouldn't be doing. And in the second book, the first half was very much about what I think is going on, and the second half was very much about what I think we should do about this, because I think there's a lot of great stuff happening out there, but there's also some stuff that's a little bit of a worry. It concerns me, and I think we should be aware of that and actually do certain things. In terms of the number one thing we should be doing right now, the simple answer to that is we should be thinking. We just need to think about the future more, but in a meaningful way, not for 5 seconds, not even for 10 minutes. I think we should be engaging in conversations and reading deeply about it. I mean, the future is an important place because that's where we're all going to live there. Okay, so it's really, really important. So, and if it doesn't turn out the way we like, that's our own fault for not thinking about it. And I think if we think about it properly, we can influence it to some extent. And you can't predict it, but you can invent it. And I think, as I was saying earlier on, we in the conference, I think as individuals, as households, as corporations, as countries, and even the whole planet, we should be thinking very, very deeply about where we are right now and which direction we're heading in. And if we're unhappy about that, we need to stick our hands up and say something. And also, I think, to some extent, whilst you can anticipate different futures and be prepared, I think the world would be much better right now if we could collectively agree where it is we want to go and start moving in that direction. And I think a lot of our anxiety at the moment is to do with the level of speed of change, and particularly the fact that we've no longer got a clear view of what lies ahead. I think prior to about 2000, 2001, I think we had a relatively clear view of where we were going, and I think that's now got very confused and very foggy, and people have no idea what's going to happen next, and that is adding to their anxieties. And that, to some extent, would evaporate if we had a clear vision of where it is we want to go. And I think that is the role of our leaders. That is the role of CEOs and politicians and prime ministers, to have a vision and to articulate it.
Okay. We're done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your precious time. It was great to listen to your insight about future.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. The first book is Future Files. Is a general book about what I think is going to happen over the next 50 years, and looks at all sorts of industrial sectors ranging from healthcare to financial services and so on. The second book, Future Mind, is much more specific. It's looking at the impacts of digital culture, and particularly the screen age, on thinking and behaviour, and makes some suggestions as to future direction that we should take. and it is very much a book about innovation and creativity and the future of ideas.